My name is Callie Bellamy, 32 years old from suburban New Orleans. I walked into the lawyer's office expecting grief, not betrayal. But when the will was read, my name wasn't even on the page. That's when I knew my family hadn't just forgotten me. They erased me. Before we begin, have you ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most? This is the story of how I uncovered the truth my family tried to bury, and took them down in court. Like the video, and subscribe for more real-life stories of betrayal, revenge, and redemption. Now, let's begin. The air inside the law office was cold and sterile, nothing like the sweltering New Orleans heat that had followed me from Metairie to downtown. I sat between silence and suspicion, knees pressed together, hands damp in my lap. My father's attorney, Mr. Crawley, looked older than I remembered, his once dark hair now mostly gray, his eyes fogged behind thick lenses. Across the polished oak table sat my cousins, Charlene and Wyatt, dressed in somber black like two actors overplaying a part. Charlene wore a lace veil, which felt more like theater than mourning. Wyatt hadn't even loosened his tie, he looked more like a man preparing to pitch a deal than grieve his uncle. I waited for Mr. Crawley to speak. I kept waiting for him to say my name. Instead, he cleared his throat and began, I, Raymond Ellis Bellamy, being of sound mind and body. I barely heard the rest. At first, I assumed it was an error, that maybe he'd skipped a page. But as the document unfolded, line by line, bequeathing the house, the business, the land, everything, to Charlene and Wyatt, the buzzing in my ears grew louder. My name never came, not once. The moment Crawley finished reading, silence swept the room. The kind of silence that hangs just before a storm. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. It felt like the room had shrunk around me. Charlene offered me a delicate smile, all crocodile and teeth. Callie, I know this must be difficult, she said sweetly, as if my entire existence hadn't just been erased. Wyatt avoided my gaze. Difficult? No. This wasn't difficult. This was impossible. I'd been with my father just a few weeks before he died. He was fine. Tired, yes, but he was laughing, telling me stories about the first time he laid bricks with his bare hands. We talked about adding a new porch to the back of the Metairie house. He said he wanted it finished before the heat really kicked in, so how could a man like that, my father, simply forget I existed? I stood up. There has to be a mistake. Crawley looked apologetic. I assure you, Miss Bellamy, this is the most recent will we have on file. Signed and notarized. I stared at him. What about the copy in his safe? Charlene's lips twitched. Oh, that? He got rid of that months ago. Cleaned out the whole workshop before he passed. Liar, I knew my father. He wouldn't have done this, not unless something, or someone, made him. I walked out without another word, the sweat clinging to my back as I stepped into the sun. They thought this was over. They thought I would just fade into the background like some forgotten footnote, but I knew better. This wasn't grief, this was war. The cicadas were screaming when I pulled up behind the Metairie house just after midnight. The heat hadn't broken, even with the moon high and pale above me. I killed the engine and sat in the dark, staring at the home that had once been my world. The shutters were closed. The porch was empty. The Bellamy house didn't feel like mine anymore. But I wasn't here for sentiment, I was here for truth. I pulled out the old brass key I'd found in a shoebox buried deep in my closet. It had been tucked beneath some photos, taped inside a small envelope with one word written in my father's steady hand, workshop. Most people forgot about the workshop behind the house. A weather-beaten tool shed, tucked between the garden and the privacy fence. It hadn't been used in years. At least, that's what Charlene claimed. I crept through the side yard, heart pounding, staying close to the shadows. The grass brushed against my legs as I made my way to the shed door. I tried the key, it turned easily. Too easily. Inside, the air was thick, dust, wood, and something else. Memory. Faint outlines of my childhood lingered on every shelf. The red level my father always swore by. An old set of pliers. A faded mug that once held cold coffee more than nails, I scanned the room, searching for anything, that didn't belong. And then I saw it. A metal filing cabinet pushed into the back corner, partially obscured beneath a paint-stained tarp. I tugged the tarp aside and gripped the drawer handles. Locked, I crouched down, feeling beneath the cabinet, and found a hidden compartment taped to the underside. Inside, a smaller key. My breath caught. I unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside were folders. Receipts. Permits. Deeds. And there, pressed flat, inside a sealed plastic sleeve, was a will. Dated just 2 months before my father died, with trembling hands. I pulled it free and read the first line: "This is the last will and testament of Raymond Ellis Bellamy." And there it was, my name, not theirs. Mine, the house, the company, the land, everything, had been left to me. I pressed my palm over my mouth, stunned by the wave of emotion. Grief. Relief. Fury. Taped to the back of the sleeve was a small, handwritten note: "Callie, if anything happens to me, this is the truth. Trust no one. Not even the ones who call themselves family." He knew. I clutched the letter to my chest, feeling something inside me settle. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. They had tried to erase me with a pen and a lie, but I had the real ink, and now, I had the fire to burn everything false down to the ground. I sat on the floor of my father's dusty workshop, my back against the cool metal of the filing cabinet, the plastic sleeve in my lap. The will alone was enough to shake the foundation of everything Charlene and Wyatt had built their lies upon, but the letter taped to the back of it? That was the blade. I peeled the yellowed paper free, careful not to tear the edges. It was folded twice, and the ink had smudged in places. I recognized the handwriting immediately: neat, blocky, and pressed with the kind of pressure that only came from someone who meant every word. "Callie, if you're reading this, then something went wrong. Or maybe everything went exactly how they planned it. I've never been good at showing things. Not grief, not love. You always said I built walls." Funny thing, coming from the girl who could spot a crack in drywall from 20 feet away, but I saw you. Always. Even when you thought I didn't, you were the only one who ever stayed when I got sick. The only one who didn't ask for more when I had nothing left to give. My eyes stung. I changed the will because you were the only one I trusted. Wyatt is reckless. Charlene is worse. I found out too late what they were doing: draining the company, hiding debts. They tried to play me. I let them think they won, for a while. But I always had a backup plan: you, baby girl. You were the plan. If they forged anything after I died, if they tried to keep you out, don't let them. Use this. Use Crawley, if you must. He'll deny it now, but he's not as blind as he acts. Fight. Don't let them erase you. Or me, and remember, blood isn't loyalty. Blood is just biology. What you do with truth, that's family. Love you always, Dad. I sat there for a long time, gripping the pages like they were the last pieces of him I had left. I'd spent weeks wondering how he could forget me, how he could leave me behind like I didn't matter. But he hadn't. He'd seen everything. And he'd trusted me to make it right. I wiped my face and stood, heart pounding with new resolve. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about truth. About legacy. About silencing the people who thought I'd roll over and disappear just because they wore black and faked grief in a courthouse conference room. They thought they'd buried the truth, but they forgot one thing: I'd always been my father's daughter, and I knew how to rebuild what they tried to burn, brick by brick. Mr. Crawley didn't look surprised to see me walk into his office with the real will tucked under my arm. He just sighed, motioned for me to close the door, and leaned back in his cracked leather chair like a man who had seen this storm coming a long time ago. "I figured you'd find it eventually," he said, tapping a worn pen against a yellow legal pad. "You knew?" I asked, barely able to keep the sharpness out of my voice. "I suspected. Your father wasn't a man who left things to chance." "And the will Charlene and Wyatt brought in?" "It was too clean. Too recent. I couldn't prove anything, but I knew something stunk. I laid the documents on the desk, both the handwritten letter and the will. Now you can. He read them carefully, his eyes narrowing as he skimmed through the pages. When he finally looked up, there was steel in his gaze I hadn't seen before. You know this won't be easy. I'm not here for easy, I said. I'm here for the truth. Crawley nodded slowly. Then let's prepare for a fight. The next few days were a whirlwind. Filing paperwork. Digging up bank records. Calling in experts to verify the signature on the forged will. I felt like I was pulling threads out of a sweater, watching the lies slowly unravel, but then came the warning. It started small. An envelope shoved under my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words written in all caps, "Drop it." Then Crawley called me late one night. "Callie," he said, voice tight. There was a fire. Small, but intentional. Someone lit a rag against the side of my building. Didn't do much damage, but the fire marshal confirmed it was no accident. My blood ran cold. You think it's them? I don't think. I know. I swallowed hard, glancing toward my living room window as if Charlene or Wyatt might be lurking in the dark outside. Do we stop? I asked. No, Crawley said firmly. We go louder. This proves we're rattling the right cages. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like war. I started checking over my shoulder everywhere I went. I moved the real will to a safety deposit box. I changed my phone number. Bought a new lock for my apartment door. And yet, every time I walked to my car, I felt eyes on me. Still, I refused to back down. They thought fear would break me, but fear is a fire, too, and in the right hands. It doesn't destroy. It refines. Let them come. Let them try to silence me. I wasn't backing down, not when I was this close to burning their lies to the ground. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold air, the kind that sinks into your bones and doesn't leave. I sat in the plaintiff's chair, my hands steady on the table but my stomach in knots. The judge was already reviewing the evidence, and the jury, the people who would decide whether my father's legacy was truth or fiction, watched with wary curiosity. Charlene and Wyatt sat across from me in polished suits and blank expressions, but it was all theater. Charlene wore pearls and a black blazer as if she were the grieving daughter of a man who hadn't left her a cent. Wyatt didn't meet my eyes. Not once. Mr. Crawley stood beside me, calmly leafing through files while the defense lawyers whispered like anxious hornets on their side of the room. The judge gave a nod. Plaintiff, please take the stand. I rose. The walk to the witness box felt like moving through water, slow, heavy, full of invisible pressure. But I didn't waver. I had my father's voice in my head, steady and grounded. You were the plan. I was sworn in. And then it began. Ms. Bellamy, Crawley said gently, can you tell the court what you found in your father's workshop? I cleared my throat. A filing cabinet. Locked. Inside was a copy of my father's will, dated and signed 2 months before his death. In it, he leaves his house, company, and estate to me. A murmur spread through the room. I could see Charlene's jaw tighten. And this? Crawley held up the letter in a clear sleeve, my father's handwritten letter. He said if I ever read it, it meant something had gone wrong. He warned me about Charlene and Wyatt. And told me not to let them erase me. Do you believe your father's signature was forged on the will the defendants submitted? Yes, I said clearly. And we have an expert witness who confirmed it. Charlene's attorney objected, hearsay, but the judge overruled him. Crawley continued, laying out every step I'd taken. The fire. The threats. The forged documents, but the moment that cracked everything came when Wyatt was called to testify. He looked calm as he swore in, even smirking when the defense lawyer asked him to confirm the legitimacy of the will, and then Crawley stepped forward. Mr. Whitaker, how long after your uncle's death did you and Ms. Dalton draft the new version of the will? Wyatt blinked. We didn't draft anything. He signed it a week before he passed. Crawley smiled faintly. Interesting. Because the notary you claimed witnessed it was out of the country at the time. Wyatt paled. Charlene fidgeted in her seat, her calm beginning to unravel. The jury noticed. The truth had a pulse now, beating louder with every lie they tried to maintain, and I was no longer the forgotten girl in the shadows. I was the storm walking into the light. Wyatt shifted in his seat like the courtroom bench was lined with nails. Sweat formed along his hairline, and the confident mask he'd worn just moments earlier had started to crack. The jurors watched him like hawks now, not as a grieving nephew, but as a man cornered by the weight of his own lies. "Mr. Whitaker," Crawley said, stepping forward with a slow, deliberate pace, "just to be clear, you're saying your uncle personally signed that will in front of a notary who, according to passport records, was in Belize at the time?" Wyatt's mouth opened and closed, like he was trying to catch the right lie before it escaped. His lawyer tried to object again, but the judge shot it down. Wyatt's gaze darted to Charlene, who sat frozen, her face pale and stiff. I didn't know," Wyatt stammered. "Maybe the date was mixed up. Maybe you forged the signature?" Crawley asked, not raising his voice. Just letting the silence stretch. "I didn't forge anything," Wyatt said quickly, but his voice had lost all conviction. "But someone did," Crawley said. "And you knew?" Wyatt shifted again, jaw tight. I didn't want to." Charlene said it was just a formality. "That Callie didn't deserve anything. That Uncle Ray would have wanted it this way." The words dropped like bricks in the room. The judge leaned forward. The jury straightened. Even Charlene blinked, stunned by the betrayal. "She said what?" the judge asked. Wyatt turned red, eyes flicking down. Charlene made the call. "She typed it up. I just signed what she gave me." There it was, a confession. I sat still, my heart pounding like it was trying to break out of my ribs. I didn't look at Charlene, I didn't need to. The silence behind me told me everything. Her shock, her fury, her unraveling. "Did Charlene Dalton forge your uncle's signature?" Crawley asked clearly. "For the record, yes," Wyatt muttered. "Say it again." The judge commanded. Wyatt looked up, humiliated. "Yes. She forged it." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel for order. Charlene stood suddenly, her voice shrill. "You spineless coward. You said you'd, Ms. Dalton." The judge barked. "Sit down or be removed." She sat, but the damage was done. Her mask had fallen completely now. And the jury had seen the truth, raw and ugly. I exhaled slowly, the first real breath I'd taken all day. My father's words rang in my head. "Fight. Don't let them erase you." They had tried. With lies, with fear, with fire. But I'd survived, and now? They were the ones crumbling. I wasn't just proving my right to the will. I was proving I'd never been the one who didn't belong. The courthouse in Metairie was unusually still that morning, despite the firestorm of whispers trailing through the halls. Every seat in the courtroom was filled, locals squeezed shoulder to shoulder. This wasn't just a legal matter anymore, it had become a public reckoning. Charlene sat stone-faced at the defense table, her lips pressed into a thin line, jaw clenched. Wyatt avoided looking at her, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to disappear. The damage had been done. And now, the verdict was coming. Judge Harrington, a silver-haired man with a reputation for cutting through theatrics, entered and took his seat with slow, deliberate gravity. He looked over the court, hands folded. "I've reviewed all testimony, documents, and expert reports," he began, his voice echoing across the wood-paneled walls. "This court does not take claims of forgery lightly, but when the evidence is this overwhelming, denials become insults to the truth." He paused, then turned to face Charlene directly. "Ms. Dalton, you orchestrated a scheme to falsify a legal document, intentionally excluded the rightful heir, and attempted to defraud this court. That is not just morally reprehensible, it is criminal." Charlene flinched, but still didn't speak. "Not a word," Judge Harrington continued. This court finds that the will submitted by the defendants is invalid due to proven fraud. The handwritten will discovered by Ms. Bellamy, with corroborating documents and personal correspondence from Raymond Bellamy, is declared the true and binding last will and testament. I couldn't breathe for a moment. It was happening. It was real. I hereby order that all assets, property, and holdings listed in that document be transferred to the sole legal heir, Ms. Callie Bellamy. The words hit me like a wave. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat very still, my father's voice whispering through my memory. You were the plan. Charlene stood suddenly. This isn't over, she spat, venomous. You think you've won? But the courtroom doors opened just then. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped inside. The judge didn't flinch, Ms. Dalton, the district attorney has reviewed the charges. You are hereby placed under arrest for willful fraud, perjury, and attempted grand theft. The gasp that swept through the room felt like a thunderclap. Charlene backed away from the deputies, her face a mixture of disbelief and rage. You're making a mistake, she hissed, her eyes fixed on me. He should have left it to us. But her voice faded as they led her out in cuffs. Wyatt remained silent, crumpled in his chair, the picture of a man who'd finally understood the cost of loyalty to the wrong person. I stood slowly, not out of pride, out of peace. This wasn't about the land, the money, or the house. It was about truth being louder than lies. About honoring a man who, even in death, made sure his daughter wasn't erased, and now, in a courtroom in Metairie, justice had spoken. After the court ruling, I returned to the old Bellamy house for the first time in years, alone, and with keys that now truly belonged to me. The place still smelled like my father's aftershave and aged wood. Dust hung in streaks across the morning light. And the hardwood floors creaked like they remembered everything that had happened here. I stood in the doorway, my fingers brushing the worn trim, and took a long breath. I expected to feel victorious, but I didn't. I felt ready. This house was never really mine, not the way people imagined. It had been his, and then it had been haunted by lies. I didn't want to live inside ghosts. I didn't want to play warden over a legacy weighed down by betrayal, so I sold it, the house, the land, the old family business, everything. I let it go like a skin that didn't fit anymore, and with the money, I started something better. It began with a small office in downtown Metairie. Nothing fancy, second floor walk up. No sign on the door yet. Just a name, the Bellamy Center for Financial Justice. I hired a social worker, then a lawyer. We offered free consultations to people who'd been cut out of estates, bullied into signing over property, or manipulated by their own blood. People came. Quietly, at first. Then steadily, an older woman whose son forged her name and took out loans against her house. A man who'd been forced to give his inheritance to his sister to keep the peace. A college student whose parents used her identity to open credit cards. They came with stories like mine, and I listened. Not with pity, but with purpose. I knew what it meant to be betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you. I knew the loneliness of standing up to family and being told you're overreacting or you're being ungrateful. I turned those wounds into bricks. Built something from them. At the grand opening 6 months later, I stood under a simple banner and looked out at a room full of survivors. Not victims. Not broken people, survivors. Some had won their battles. Others were still fighting. But all of them understood the same truth. Sometimes family isn't your safety net. Sometimes they're the ones you have to save yourself from. I didn't need revenge anymore. What I needed was a way to make the pain mean something. The center did that, and in a way, so did my father. Because he believed in me enough to leave me the truth, even when no one else did. What I built wasn't a monument to what they took from me, it was a lighthouse for people still trapped in the storm. The Bellamy house had a narrow strip of land by the side porch, forgotten by most, overshadowed by the grand columns and brickwork. But not by me. That's where my father planted roses every spring, always red, always without fail, even when arthritis made his hands tremble. I returned there 1 year after the verdict. Walking the path alone as the cicadas sang softly in the Louisiana heat. The house had new owners now, a young couple with a baby on the way. They'd painted the shutters blue and added wind chimes to the back porch. I was glad. The house needed new laughter, not the echoes of old lies, but the rosebush still stood, the roots were stubborn. Just like the man who planted them. I crouched beside it, brushing dirt from the base with my fingers. A single bloom had opened overnight, its red petals soft as memory. I smiled. This is where it started, I whispered, not the fight. Not the trial, the truth. It was beside this bush that I'd found the envelope tucked inside an old watering can, days after the reading of the false will. The real one. The letter. My father's voice, rescued from the silence others had tried to bury. He hadn't shouted from the grave, he'd whispered where he knew I'd listen, and I laid a new rose, freshly cut from a bouquet I'd brought with me, at the base of the bush. Then another. One for him, and one for me. I built something. Dad, I said, not needing him to hear it out loud. Not the house. Not the company. Something better. Something that might outlast us both. A wind stirred through the yard, light and warm. The kind of breeze that didn't disrupt, it carried things forward. Like names. Like legacies. Like peace. I stood slowly, brushing my hands off on my jeans, and turned to leave. But not before taking one last glance. This rosebush had weathered fires, betrayals, greed. Just like me, it had been pruned harshly. Still it bloomed. Outside the gate, my car waited. I had a meeting that afternoon with a woman whose brother emptied their parents' retirement fund while they were in hospice. Her hands had trembled when she'd called the center. I knew that tremble. I knew that silence, and now, I knew how to help. I wasn't the erased daughter anymore. I wasn't a victim, a name left off a page. I was the proof that truth, once planted, will grow, sometimes quietly. Sometimes slowly, but always in time. They tried to write me out of the story. But I became the author of the ending. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or left behind, you are not alone. Like this video if you believe truth always finds a way. Subscribe for more real-life stories filled with resilience, justice, and emotional redemption. Share your thoughts or your own story in the comments. We read every single one. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs a reminder. You can rise,